Trust is the foundation of any marriage. But what happens when that trust is shattered? What happens when secrets lurk in the shadows, when love turns to deception, and when betrayal takes an unexpected and fatal turn? This is the story of a husband, a wife, and the co-worker who came between them. It's a story of hidden desires, fractured bonds, and choices that spiraled out of control. A workplace affair that began in whispers ended in tragedy, leaving lives broken, questions unanswered, and a community in shock. Why would a husband risk everything for a forbidden relationship? How did an innocent wife's world come crashing down because of someone she thought she could trust? And perhaps, most chilling of all, how did it all end in an act so unthinkable? No one saw it coming. It's a case that asks the question we're all afraid to answer. What would drive someone to commit the ultimate act of betrayal? The answer might just surprise you. To truly understand how a simple betrayal spiraled into a deadly confrontation, we must go back to where it all began. A picture-perfect life that wasn't quite what it seemed. Meet Daniel Hayes, a 38-year-old marketing manager at a mid-sized advertising agency. By all accounts, Daniel was the kind of man who seemed to have it all: a stable job, a beautiful home, and a loving wife. Colleagues described him as charming, ambitious, and always quick with a smile. But behind that polished exterior was a man grappling with dissatisfaction, restless and secretly yearning for something more. Then there was Sarah Hayes, Daniel's wife of 12 years. At 36, Sarah was known for her warmth and generosity, the kind of person who baked cookies for the neighbors and volunteered at the local animal shelter. She had built a life around her husband and their dreams, balancing her career as a nurse with her role as a devoted partner. To Sarah, their marriage wasn't just a commitment. It was her anchor, her safe harbor in a chaotic world. But this story doesn't just belong to Daniel and Sarah. Enter Emma Carson, a 29-year-old rising star at Daniel's firm. Sharp, ambitious, and magnetic, Emma was the type of person who could command a room with her presence. She also happened to be Sarah's co-worker at the hospital a few years prior. While they weren't close friends, their paths had crossed often enough for Sarah to think of her as a friendly acquaintance. What Sarah didn't know was how Emma's connection to Daniel would evolve into something far more destructive. The story unfolds in a suburban town outside Chicago, a place where the houses have white picket fences. The streets are lined with maple trees, and life seems, at first glance, idyllic. Daniel's advertising agency was known for its demanding deadlines and late nights, the kind of environment where professional boundaries often blurred. It was here, in the dim glow of late-night brainstorming sessions, that Daniel and Emma's relationship began to change. In hindsight, the warning signs were there. Daniel started coming home later than usual, claiming he was buried under an avalanche of work. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, was now always in his pocket or face down on the table. Sarah noticed he was more distracted, more irritable, and increasingly withdrawn. At first, she chalked it up to stress. After all, who hasn't had a rough patch at work? But as the weeks turned into months, the distance between them grew. Then there were the seemingly innocent mentions of Emma. Emma had a great idea for the campaign, Daniel would say, or Emma really knows how to think outside the box. At first, Sarah didn't think much of it. Emma was a co-worker, nothing more. But as her name began to surface more frequently in conversations, Sarah couldn't ignore the pang of unease creeping into her thoughts. For Daniel and Emma, their connection began innocently enough, sharing ideas over coffee, venting about the pressures of their industry, and laughing at inside jokes. But what started as camaraderie soon turned into something deeper. Their late-night meetings became longer, their texts more personal. The line between professional and personal blurred until it disappeared altogether. For Daniel, Emma represented everything he felt was missing in his life. Youthful energy, ambition, and a sense of excitement he hadn't felt in years. For Emma, the appeal was different. Perhaps it was Daniel's experience, his charm, or the thrill of being desired by someone seemingly out of reach. Whatever the reasons, their affair quickly intensified. But what about Sarah? While Daniel and Emma were swept up in their clandestine romance, Sarah was left to piece together the fragments of her crumbling marriage. She began to notice the growing gap in their intimacy, the moments when Daniel's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She could feel him slipping away, but she didn't know why, or who he was slipping toward. And yet, she clung to hope, believing that whatever was wrong could be fixed, as long as they faced it together. Little did she know, the storm brewing beneath the surface of their lives was about to erupt in ways she could never have imagined. What began as a seemingly ordinary affair, one of countless similar stories in workplaces across the world, was about to take a dark and irreversible turn. And when it did, there would be no going back for Daniel, Sarah, or Emma. The truth has a way of seeping through the cracks, no matter how carefully it's hidden. For Sarah Hayes, those cracks began small, barely noticeable, until they grew into a chasm she could no longer ignore. It started with little things. Sarah had always trusted Daniel completely, but now there was a new nagging doubt that she couldn't shake. His late nights at work, once a rare occurrence, had become the norm. When she asked about his day, his answers were vague, his tone distant. And then there was the phone. A device that once sat in plain sight, now tucked away in his pocket, like a secret he couldn't risk exposing. The first real clue came on a quiet Saturday morning. Sarah was tidying the kitchen when Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't the buzz that caught her attention. It was the way he lunged for it, his face flushing as he mumbled something about a work email. Suspicious, Sarah waited until he was out of the room before glancing at the screen. The message was gone, but the notification banner revealed the sender. Emma Carson. Her heart sank. Why was Emma texting him on a Saturday? Why had he been so quick to hide it? For the first time in their marriage, Sarah felt the sting of betrayal, a pain that would only deepen as the days went on. Determined to put her fears to rest, Sarah began to notice other things. There were receipts from restaurants she hadn't been to, subtle changes in his appearance, new cologne, a sharper wardrobe, and a growing disinterest in the little routines that had once defined their relationship. When she tried to talk to him, he brushed her off with excuses, his irritation bubbling just beneath the surface. And then, one evening, while folding laundry, Sarah found it. A crumpled piece of paper in the pocket of Daniel's jacket. On it was a hastily scrawled note, Emma's name, and what looked like a hotel room number. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was proof. When Sarah confronted Daniel, the tension that had been simmering between them exploded. He denied everything at first, his voice rising defensively as he accused her of invading his privacy. But Sarah was relentless, presenting him with the note, the late-night texts, the changes in his behavior. Finally, he admitted it. There was no point denying it any longer. "It's not what you think," Daniel insisted, his tone wavering between guilt and defiance. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to." But to Sarah, it didn't matter how it happened. All she could see was the betrayal, the lies, and the image of her husband and Emma together in places she'd never been invited. Their once peaceful home became a battlefield, filled with accusations, shouting matches, and tearful pleas for explanations that never satisfied her questions. As weeks turned into months, the affair began to unravel under the weight of its own deception. What had once been an intoxicating secret for Daniel and Emma now felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Emma started demanding more of Daniel's time, growing frustrated with the constraints of their illicit relationship. She wanted him to leave Sarah, to make their relationship official. But Daniel hesitated, caught between guilt, obligation, and the thrill of his double life. Sarah, meanwhile, reached her breaking point. One evening, after weeks of silence, she decided to confront Emma directly. She showed up at the advertising agency unannounced, storming into the office with a mix of fury and desperation. The confrontation was loud, public, and impossible for anyone in the office to ignore. Emma tried to stay calm, but the tension was too much, and soon the whole affair was out in the open. For Daniel, the fallout was immediate. His colleagues whispered behind his back, his once sterling reputation tarnished. Sarah began telling close friends about the betrayal, and the community rallied around her. Emma, too, faced judgment from co-workers who now saw her as a homewrecker. The affair, once thrilling, had become a source of shame and regret. By now, the lives of Daniel, Sarah, and Emma had been turned upside down. The affair had come to light, shattering any sense of normalcy. But as they tried to pick up the pieces of their broken lives, something far more sinister was about to unfold. This wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was one of obsession, desperation, and a crime so shocking it would leave everyone asking, how could it have come to this? It was a cold, rainy evening in early November when it happened. The kind of night when the streets are eerily quiet, and the sound of raindrops on windows fills the void. Sarah had spent the day at home, struggling with the fallout of her crumbling marriage. She hadn't heard from Daniel, who had been staying at a motel, claiming he needed space. But tonight, that silence would be broken in the most horrifying way. Around 10:45 p.m., a 911 call came through from a passerby on a secluded stretch of road just outside town. The caller reported hearing a loud argument, followed by what sounded like a gunshot. Police rushed to the scene, and what they found was chilling. Daniel Hayes was lying on the ground, motionless, with a single gunshot wound to the chest. His car was parked nearby, the headlights still on, illuminating the scene like a macabre spotlight. Standing just a few feet away, trembling and soaked from the rain, was Emma Carson. In her hand was a gun, and on her face was an expression that could only be described as a mixture of shock and terror. "It was an accident!" she cried, as officers approached her, her voice frantic and broken. "I didn't mean to." But the scene told a different story. The gun had clearly been fired at close range, and Daniel's body showed no signs of a struggle. The officers arrested Emma on the spot, but the question remained, was this truly an accident, or something far more calculated? As the investigation began, detectives looked into the tangled web of relationships that had led to that rainy November night. Emma, now the primary suspect, told a story that seemed almost too convenient. According to her, Daniel had called her earlier that evening, asking to meet so they could talk. She claimed that their argument escalated when she confronted him about his refusal to leave Sarah, and in a moment of panic, the gun went off. But there were holes in her story that investigators couldn't ignore. First, the gun itself. Emma claimed it was Daniel's, but ballistics tests revealed her fingerprints all over the weapon, while his were notably absent. Second, the location of the shooting. The secluded road where Daniel was found wasn't a place one would simply stumble upon. It was the kind of spot you'd go to if you didn't want to be seen, a fact that made detectives question whether the meeting was truly spontaneous. And then there were the text messages. Forensic analysis of Emma's phone revealed a series of messages sent to Daniel in the days leading up to his death. They started out emotional, pleas for him to leave Sarah, but quickly grew more threatening. "You can't keep doing this to me, Daniel," one read. Another, sent just hours before the shooting, said, "If I can't have you, no one will." These revelations painted a picture of a woman who was unraveling, her emotions spiraling out of control as she realized her relationship with Daniel was slipping away. But Emma wasn't the only one under scrutiny. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered something unexpected. Sarah had also been in contact with Daniel that night. Phone records showed she had called him multiple times in the hours before his death, and one witness reported seeing a car matching hers near the crime scene. Could it be that Sarah, too, had a role in what happened? Adding to the mystery was a set of muddy footprints found near the scene. Footprints that didn't match either Daniel's or Emma's shoes. This raised a chilling possibility. Was there a third person involved? One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from a motel clerk who claimed to have seen Daniel and Emma arguing in the motel parking lot earlier that evening. According to the clerk, Emma was shouting at Daniel, her voice carrying even through the closed window of his car. "You're a liar!" she reportedly screamed. "You're going to regret this." But another witness complicated the narrative. A jogger who had been running near the scene that night reported seeing a woman matching Sarah's description standing near a car, looking visibly distressed. Could it be that Sarah had been there all along, watching from the shadows? As investigators pieced together the timeline, the case only grew more perplexing. Who had the most to gain from Daniel's death? Was Emma truly acting in self-defense, or was her desperation more dangerous than anyone had realized? And what about Sarah? Was she an innocent victim? Or did her heartbreak drive her to seek revenge? But just when detectives thought they had it all figured out, a new piece of evidence emerged. Something so shocking it turned the entire case on its head. What they discovered would change everything, forcing them to reconsider everything they thought they knew about that fateful night. The shocking death of Daniel Hayes sent ripples through his family, his workplace, and the quiet suburban community that had once seemed so far removed from tragedy. As the investigation concluded, the focus shifted to the courtroom where the betrayal and heartbreak would be unraveled in a fight for justice. But as the trial unfolded, it became clear that the truth was just as complicated as the crime itself. Emma Carson was the first to face charges. Prosecutors painted her as a woman scorned, driven by jealousy and desperation to commit the ultimate act of violence. Using the text messages, the gun, and witness testimonies, the prosecution argued that Emma had lured Daniel to the secluded road with the intention of confronting him, and possibly killing him if he refused to leave his wife. They emphasized the threatening tone of her messages and the incriminating fingerprints on the weapon. But Emma's defense team had a different story. They argued that she had been emotionally manipulated by Daniel, who had made promises he never intended to keep. They claimed that the meeting that night was meant to bring closure to their relationship, but when Daniel became aggressive, Emma panicked. The gun, they argued, had gone off accidentally in the heat of the moment. The trial was a spectacle. The courtroom was packed with reporters, neighbors, and friends, all eager to witness the dramatic unfolding of a case that had already gripped the nation. Sarah Hayes attended every session, her face a stoic mask, as she listened to the details of her husband's betrayal and his tragic end. The tension between her and Emma was palpable. Two women whose lives had been forever altered by one man's choices. The revelation of the muddy footprints near the crime scene added a layer of complexity to the case. A forensics expert testified that the prints matched neither Emma nor Daniel, suggesting the possibility of a third party. This raised an unsettling question. Could Sarah have been there that night, watching, or worse, intervening? Another twist came when a former colleague of Daniel's took the stand, revealing that Daniel had confided in him about feeling trapped between Emma and Sarah. According to the colleague, Daniel had expressed fear that Emma might do something crazy if he tried to end their relationship. Perhaps the most shocking moment came when Sarah herself was called to testify. Under oath, she admitted to driving near the scene that night, claiming she wanted to confront Daniel about the affair. She denied having anything to do with the shooting, but her presence added another layer of doubt to an already murky case. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Emma Carson was found guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. But even with the verdict, many questions lingered. Was Emma solely responsible, or was there more to the story than anyone dared to admit? For Sarah Hayes, the verdict brought little solace. Her husband was gone, her marriage shattered, and her life forever altered by the choices of the man she had once trusted most. In interviews following the trial, Sarah spoke of her struggle to rebuild her life, haunted by the memories of Daniel's betrayal and the violent end to his life. "I don't know if I'll ever truly understand what happened," she said. "All I can do is try to move forward." Emma's family was similarly devastated. They described her as a kind and ambitious woman who had lost her way in the throes of an ill-fated relationship. Her mother, in a tearful statement, insisted that Emma wasn't a murderer but a victim of her own emotions. "She made a terrible mistake," her mother said, "but she's not a monster." The community, once quiet and close-knit, was left reeling. Neighbors whispered about the affair, the betrayal, and the tragic end, wondering how such a tragedy could have unfolded right under their noses. The advertising agency where Daniel and Emma worked saw several resignations as employees struggled to move past the scandal. Even the local hospital where Sarah worked felt the impact, as staff rallied around her, offering support while grappling with the moral complexities of the case. The story of Daniel Hayes, Emma Carson, and Sarah Hayes is one of love gone wrong, but it's also a story that raises difficult questions about human relationships, trust, and accountability. Was justice truly served? Emma paid the price for her actions, but what about Daniel's role in creating the toxic triangle that led to his death? Could this tragedy have been avoided? If Daniel had been honest from the start, or if Emma had walked away, would 3 lives have been spared this devastation? This case also shines a light on the dangers of workplace relationships and the blurred boundaries they can create. When personal and professional lives collide, the consequences can be catastrophic, not just for those involved, but for everyone around them. It's a sobering reminder of how small choices can lead to unimaginable outcomes. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that uncover the darker side of human nature.